Welcome back to Families in Action, brought to you on our hometown station, AM 1220, KHTS. If you're just joining us, we are talking about the ever-growing problem of the heroin and prescription pill epidemic throughout the United States, but we told you some numbers locally. Before we go any further, I want to remind everyone that there is a fire on Bouquet Canyon. Apparently, it's located at the Lily of the Valley Mobile Home Park in that area right there. That is between Plum Canyon and Vasquez Canyon. So if you're going up or coming down Bouquet Canyon, be careful out there and be prepared to be stopped by emergency vehicles as you're going through that area. So I tell you what, Cary, we gave out some numbers, and it's always alarming to give out the numbers, and I hope people are paying attention to that. But it really doesn't paint a true picture as to, most of the people that we're talking about in this, in the overdoses and the heroin and the prescription pill epidemic are between the ages of 18 and 25. Like that's, and maybe a little bit older.
You know what? Yes, and no. The heroin definitely.
Right.
But we're treating more and more people that are older when it comes to age
to prescription
medications, the benzos, the opiates, people, and we're treating also. This is really scary, and I've been seeing this slowly creeping up now for over 10 years. We got stronger and better drugs.
Right.
And for good reason. We don't want people to feel pain, and we don't want people to have extreme anxiety, and there's reasons for medications. But because of that, when you're treating people with pain and they need to continue to take medications like Oxy and Roxys and Vicodins and all that stuff, you get what you call dependent.
Right.
Physically dependent. So we're treating now more and more accidental drug addicts than we have ever treated before, with no track record, no history. So that's really becoming frightening. Is becoming frightening. The other thing that happens too when it comes to that is these prescription pills. Doctors are looking and they're knowing this guy went to 8 doctors and got all these prescriptions. There's a
database.
There's a database that they're looking at, and even the pharmacists are looking at that too. So it's getting more and more difficult for these accidental addicts to get these pills. Right. So they go and they hit the dealers. And those pills become very expensive. So the dealers then say, hey, for a whole lot less, you could smoke this heroin. It's an opiate. It does the same trick. So now we're actually seeing more and more really heroin addicts with no track record.
Right.
With no history that now are addicted to heroin.
Right.
So this whole, it's just kind of, how do you say it? It's horrible.
Well, and our younger crowd that's using the heroin today, a lot of them, by the time they reach 24, 25 years old, they are using it intravenously. Yeah. But a couple of years before that, they're not. And it's a whole different.
Well, Bob, you can talk to this. It used to be that heroin addicts, you thought of them, they were junkies. They would stick needles in their arms in a dark alley. It's not like that anymore. That's not people's thinking, is it? Because of this smoking.
No, it's almost like a designer drug these days.
It is.
And the way that it's delivered and the crowd that's using it is just not the same crowd anymore. So
yeah.
How does a person get to heroin use? They just. You talked about the prescription medications, but there's so many of these kids out there that are just smoking heroin or shooting heroin, and they're not even thinking of it as that big a deal.
No.
Even in the days that we grew up, amongst the drug addicts, you mentioned heroin, it was like, whoa, that's serious stuff.
No, people didn't do it. I'm recovering. I've been clean 34 years, but we didn't shoot dope. We wouldn't even think about using heroin. It was a taboo. It was a taboo thing.
Right.
But today it's not. It's like you said. It's more of it's accepted with the younger generation. It's more of a designer kind of deal, And it's one of those kind of things that all drug abuse. And I want to get this straight. Let's get this straight. All drug abuse starts innocently.
Like nobody ever tells themselves, you know what, tomorrow I want to be a drug addict.
No, it always starts innocently. We have contracts that we have when we're little. We're never going to do these kinds of things. And what happens? We start breaking our contracts. We smoke a cigarette. It's only a cigarette. I won't smoke weed. It's only pot. Come on, dude. It's not a drug, so we smoke a little bit of pot. All the other drugs is what I would call drugs of opportunity, meaning our youngsters are going to go to parties. Those drugs are there.
Right.
They're already breaking contracts. They smoke a little bit of pot. They have a little bit to drink, and the first thing that leaves their body is their reasoning to reason. And they're a whole lot more apt to experiment with those other drugs when they're already high. And Bob, this is what we do. We've been doing this forever. How many times do you need to smoke heroin or smoke speed to get addicted?
Well, one time. I mean, if you put any of these so-called harder drugs into your system, the effect is so much more than a lot of the other drugs, and it's a profound effect that just grabs a hold of a person. So sometimes for people, the first time they use it, boom, they're just off and running.
Especially if they have what we call an addictive personality.
Sure.
Sure. It made them feel different and better than anything they ever felt before, and they're off to the races.
Well, and you first time users, they're experiencing all of the sort of positive effects of it, like it feels good and oh my God, this is great, with nothing negative happening yet.
Yeah.
And it's such a trick is in a very short period of time, a person is hooked, if not the first time, and then by the time they start really feeling the negative effects of it, or getting in trouble, or getting arrested, or losing out on school, or all of that stuff, they're so physically hooked.
They're off to the races.
It's hard to. It's almost impossible for a person to stop on their own.
Right. Right. And well, that's why there's companies like Action.
Yep.
17 days on the run. Now Richard Matt and David Sweat's DNA has been found inside a cabin that had been burglarized. Correspondent Deborah Farrick reports police are looking to see if anyone helped them since they've been on the run.
We're being told now from a source who's familiar with this that investigators are looking at hotels in that area. They're searching guest registries over the last 6 to 8 months to see who may have stayed at those hotels and who may have possibly helped them.
In less than an hour, sources say South Carolina's Republican Governor Nikki Haley will call for removing the Confederate flag from the state capitol. Senator Lindsey Graham will also reportedly say the place for the rebel flag is in a museum. But correspondent Athena Jones reports removing the flag is not a done deal.
There is an uphill battle. There's a lot of support in South Carolina, according to recent polls, for keeping that flag flying.
Intense thunderstorms across the Midwest have canceled more than 150 flights at O'Hare Airport. I'm Evan Haney.
Your local pharmacist is also a Health Mart pharmacist, and they're not like other pharmacists.
After Mom's surgery, I was overwhelmed, but I was so relieved. Her Health Mart pharmacist was there.
1220 KHTS. Just a quick reminder, there is a fire at the, where is it again?
Lily of the Valley Trailer Park in that area. It's between Vasquez Canyon and Plum Canyon on Bouquet. So if you're out in that area, watch out for the emergency vehicles and be cautious.
Yeah. Hey, Bob.
So just as a reminder, we've been talking about some numbers, but, here's another one that may hit home, is according to the CDC, every day, 44 people in the United States die from an overdose of prescription painkillers, and many more addicts are being created every day. And many of these prescription painkiller users end up using heroin as well, like we talked about earlier. Our guest is on the phone calling in. His name is Sam Quinones. He is a Los Angeles-based freelance journalist and author of 3 books. He is formerly a reporter for the Los Angeles Times, where he worked for 10 years. He's a veteran reporter on immigration, gangs, drug trafficking, the border, and Mexico. And just as a reminder, tomorrow night in Simi Valley at the Posada Royale Hotel, which is located at 1775 Madera Road at 6 p.m., Sam will be doing a book signing of his newly released book, Dreamland, The True Tale of America's Opiate Epidemic. Hey, Sam, welcome to the show.
Good to be back, guys. How you doing?
Doing well. It's been a while, huh?
Yes, it has. But finally, I think the last time I was up there was when I was working on this book, when I was working on Dreamland, and I was just still plowing through all the details, so it's been quite a haul.
You've been a busy guy, huh, Sam?
Indeed, yeah. It's been quite crazy. Promoting a book is a little bit like, it's very distracting, let's say. A million little details to keep track of.
Right. Hey. Well, I tell you what, Sam, very rarely, Cary and I are we're in everything, and we get a lot of information, and very rarely do we have a show where we're sitting there going, "Oh my God, it's such a bounty of information," and the detail with which you gave us on the last show. So it was a real privilege having you on the show. If what's the book about?
Basically, it's my attempt to explain the story of how America became addicted to opiates. I started this story really as a Times reporter, LA Times reporter, part of a team of reporters trying to understand what was the Mexican drug war. And in that capacity, as I was in LA, I spoke fluent Spanish. I'd lived for 10 years in Mexico. My job was to follow drugs as they were trafficked from the border across the United States and just write stories about that. One of the stories I came across was a story of a small town in Mexico where everybody who migrates here comes here as kind of a retail heroin salesman. Basically, they have this system for selling heroin retail, about a tenth of a gram or gram doses, what have you. That is a lot like pizza deliveries, but he's selling heroin like pizza, basically. This system began actually in the San Fernando Valley, in Canoga Park, in Van Nuys area. This system was perfected through the 80s, then with pagers, and then with cell phones in the later 90s. And today, this system from this one little town called Jalisco in the state of Nayarit. Nayarit is one of Mexico's smallest states. It's on the Pacific coast, about south of Arizona, maybe 12 hours or so. This one little town has become kind of a major source of black tar heroin supplies for the United States, and these guys have taken their system, their pizza delivery system for heroin, across the country. So they're not just content to be small-time dealers in Canoga Park and Van Nuys, but they're in Oregon, they're in North Carolina, Ohio is big for them, Kentucky, Utah, Hawaii, all over the country. There's places where these guys have set up their little their heroin franchises. I got onto that story, and I wrote that story for the LA Times, but of course, the big question is, why do these guys have such a huge market for their heroin? And that, of course, gets us back to the tale of opiate painkillers. OxyContin is probably the best known, but also, Vicodin and Percocet, some of the others. Lortab is another. And also, it got me into the understanding how it came to be that so many people were using and abusing these legitimate medical drugs. And that has to do with a revolution in American medicine that held that we are a country in pain. This began in the late 80s and really gained steam through the 1990s. We're a country in pain, and we need to treat that pain very aggressively. And really, the only way to basically treat that pain that we have available, at any rate, is through these opiate painkillers. The specialists who promoted this idea were convincing themselves, I think, quite incorrectly, that these drugs were, quote, virtually non-addictive. That's kind of the buzz phrase they use to convince doctors that they should use more of these opiates. These drugs are, quote, virtually non-addictive when used to treat pain. That proved to be very sadly untrue.
Yeah, I was wondering what drug they have taken to convince themselves to believe that.
Well, these were guys who came from an era when opiates were not used for anything.
Right.
We were a country in the 70s that never used these drugs for any reason. Even terminal cancer patients who were in agony were not getting these drugs.
Right.
And so they were formed in those years and said, no, we have to use these. And they kind of grew up like almost a religious crusade fervor to this movement, to this revolution that these guys spawned. And indeed, at first, of course, I think no one would really argue the point that it's probably a good idea to give these drugs to terminal cancer patients. If they get addicted, it's their last 6 months will be lived without grotesque agony and indecent pain, and that they're going to be addicted 6 months probably is outweighed by the fact that they're going to live a life without pain the last few months of their lives. The problem became when these guys argued, no, that's not enough. We got to use it for almost all kinds of pain, and that could be wisdom tooth extraction. You have your appendix out, and they give you big bottles of this stuff. Chronic pain. Now, some people with chronic pain desperately need these, but there was not a lot of a diagnosis about what these pills, how these pills should be applied to each person. It was kind of this fire hose effect of, we're just going to blast everybody with these pills, and some people can handle them. A lot of people cannot. And what happened was there was this, what I call in the book, a rising tide, rising sea level of pills all across the country, from your area all the way to Georgia, to Maine, to Washington State, and all parts in between. And that has led to the current crisis, I think, that we have today, where there's just too many of these pills out there. People are getting addicted to pills that were legitimately prescribed, but then also people are getting into pills in medicine cabinets that have been prescribed by doctors. For example, I had my appendix out and about 5 years ago, and they sent me home with a big bottle of Vicodin, 60 Vicodin. The message in that bottle, seriously, was, these are not going to be addictive to you. Don't just take them as many as you want. And of course, for some people, that's okay. But for a lot of people, that's not, and so
and that's
that began the heroin. That was the root of the heroin. These drugs were gateways to heroin that we're now seeing.
And that goes back to what we were saying earlier. I own drug rehabs and been doing this for many, many years, and I'll tell you, we're treating more and more accidental addicts than we have ever treated before. Hey, Sam, we need to go ahead and take a break. We'll be right back. Please don't go anywhere. This is Families in Action on your local hometown station, AM 1220 KHTS. We're coming right back.